How do you transfer your bike fit from one bike to the other? A couple common problems people have is one, getting a new bike and it just doesn't feel quite right, or two, trying to figure out what size bike to get. So in this video, I will explain my process for transferring my bike fit from one bike to the other as best I can. I'm constantly getting test bikes in, I build them up, ride them for a little while, and then ship them back. I'll talk about a few important concepts such as stack and reach. I'll talk about a couple things to watch out for when you're transferring your fit, whether on a gravel bike or a road bike. This video is supported by InGamba, which runs high-end luxury cycling tours around the world. I'm doing a trip to Portugal this April with Lawrence Tindam and Ted King. We're gonna ride the entire length of the country, 450 miles, some 30,000 feet of climbing or so in 3 days on a bike I'm going to get fitted for the day before. So I'll talk about how that process works, because this is what I do. I get new bikes, get them to fit me, and then off we go. To transfer your bike fit, you need two things. You need elbows to adjust your stack and reach, because modern bikes come with integrated cockpits and you can't move them. And you're gonna need some chamois cream, because sometimes just hoping for the best isn't good enough. I'm kidding, mostly, I hope. What you will need is four things. You will need a metric tape measure. Metric is important. You will need a plumb bob, which you can get at your local hardware store or online for 10 bucks or less. You can also use a wall to measure off of, but a plumb bob I find to be much simpler. The third thing you need is your butt. Luckily you are attached to this, so you have one of these already. And similarly, your gut is a key piece. And by that I mean how you feel about being on the bike, because ultimately that's what's most important. Do you feel comfortable, stable, and in control? So those are the four things you need to transfer your bike fit. To be clear, I'm not trying to replace the service of pro bike fitters or even the incredibly valuable service that bike shops provide of being able to go in, get on the bike, and have a pro tech help you adjust the thing. I'm not trying to replace either one of those valuable services. Instead, I'm just going to share the system that I use to transfer a bike fit and something that helps me when I'm eyeballing geo charts trying to figure out what bike size will fit me. Let's start with the concept of stack and reach. It was created by the man Dan Empfield, and it helps you understand the size of a bike now that bikes are no longer standard sizing. For instance, this is a 56 centimeter bike. Once upon a time that meant this dimension was 56 and this dimension was 56. Now bikes have all sorts of different shapes and sizes, so stack and reach is something to help you understand exactly how a bike will fit you. Both start from the bottom bracket. A frame's stack is its height from the center of the bottom bracket to the top of the head tube, taken vertically. A frame's reach is again starting from the bottom bracket to the center of the head tube. You can also do stack and reach for other parts of the bike, such as where the center of your handlebar is or where the top of your shifter is. However you do it, it's important you do it the same way from one bike to the other. That's where the concept of stack and reach came from, was a way to standardize the sizing of a bike. When I'm setting up a bike, there are two main objectives that I'm going for. One is I want my saddle to feel the same in relation to the bottom bracket, and then I want the handlebar to feel the same in relation to the saddle. Sounds simple, and generally it is, but the devil is in the details. And just like with stack and reach, it all starts at the bottom bracket. So first, we're going to focus on getting your saddle height right and your saddle fore aft correct. To measure saddle height, start at the center of the bottom bracket and go to the top of the saddle. But where on the top of the saddle? Because as you can see, just by pivoting from the front, this is 74 centimeters. You go to the back, that's 80 centimeters. So it's important to always measure to the same part fore and aft. Many pro mechanics will mark saddles with a Sharpie. Using the seat post clamp as a place to measure to can be a good frame of reference. Another thing is to measure the width. 80 millimeters is a common width that bike fitters will use. Just wherever you measure, make sure you're measuring to the same point each time. Now this only applies if you're using the same saddle from one bike to the next. It gets more complicated when you swap in other saddles, because where you sit on the saddle can vary depending on the shape of the saddle. So the easiest way to swap a bike fit is to bring your saddle with you so that this remains the same. After you have your height set, the next step is to measure the fore and aft and make sure that's the same. This is where your handy dandy plumb bob comes in. What this guy does is just gives you a nice straight line so you can measure what your setback is, how far the saddle is set back from the center of your bottom bracket. So there you can take the measure. Just like your saddle height can vary on the type of saddle, your saddle setback also varies. You know, if you've got a long nose or a different shaped nose or a stubbier nose, that can vary, 2-3 centimeters. If you don't have a plumb bob, you can also use a wall to measure the saddle setback. To do that, you simply put the bike against a wall, keep it as perpendicular as you can, measure from the wall to the front of the saddle, measure from the wall to the center of the bottom bracket, and subtract the difference. That's your setback. So what if you're switching saddles? The saddle width and shape determines how far fore and aft you sit, even between similar models. For instance, this is a normal Specialized Power. This is the Specialized Power Curve, and I sit a little bit further back on this. They're the same length saddles, but I just sit further back here. So if I had the exact same fore aft, my fit would be off. So if you're swapping saddles, you need to get on the bike and figure out where you sit in relation to the bottom bracket. So what you're trying to do is standardize. I use a plumb bob, run it off underneath my kneecap, and check the position on the spindle of the pedal. Your position may differ from mine, but what you want to do is, with the cranks perfectly horizontal, just measure your position in relation to that pedal spindle, and then when you switch over to another bike, replicate that position. This is certainly something easier to do with a friend to help you out, but you can do it just by eyeballing. And for me, I try to put the string just under my kneecap and then see that the plumb bob comes roughly to the middle of the pedal spindle. That way, like wherever you sit on whatever saddle, you've got this frame of reference for where your body is in relation to the pedal spindle. Again, my disclaimer, I'm going to keep repeating this. I'm not trying to explain this as a bike fit. By all means, go to a shop or a pro bike fitter if you want to figure out what is ideal for you. What I'm trying to share is, if you have a fit that you like, how to figure out how to transfer that over to another bike. Yes, good? Okay, let's proceed. So now we've got our saddle set in terms of height and fore aft, always going off of the bottom bracket as our starting point. Now we want to set up the front of the bike. There are two main factors we're going for. One is the reach, commonly measured from the front of the saddle to the center of the bar, and then the handlebars drop, which is the difference between the top of your saddle and the handlebar. Big can of worms here. We'll try to keep it as simple as possible while giving you enough detail to help you set up your fit. So this video is supported by InGamba. I am excited to be heading to Portugal to ride across the country, north to south, as we tackle some 450 miles in 3 days. InGamba sent me their fit sheet so they can get the bike as close to dialed as possible before we head off. Guess what was in there? Saddle height, saddle setback, bar reach, and bar drop. This is why I suggest you use a metric tape measure, because stems are measured in millimeters and centimeters, and the easiest way to adjust the stack and reach of your bar is with a stem. Again, can of worms here. Bikes are increasingly coming with integrated bar stems, which look sweet and can be sweet if they fit you, but can be a bear to adjust if they don't fit you well. So good old-fashioned traditional bar and stem is the easiest way to adjust that fit, or transfer that fit from one bike to the next. So let's start with bar reach. Ideally starting with the same saddle, so you've got apples to apples, measuring from the front of the saddle to the center of the bar. The easiest way to adjust that is by putting on a different stem. Yes, you can adjust reach with your saddle, but that's going to screw up the whole equation. To adjust height, measure what your saddle height is and measure what the bar height is, subtract the difference, and then you adjust by adding or removing spacers. Of course, you've only got a finite amount of room to work with here, and this is why you want to start with a bike frame that is your right size. Now, a few things to watch out for. You can get your measurements exactly dialed from one bike to the next of both the reach and the drop, but then you get on it and it just doesn't feel right. Bars have different reaches. Generally they're similar, but sometimes that can vary. The width of the bar also affects how far forward you have to lean. Some bikes are coming with very skinny bars. Some gravel bikes come with very wide bars. That can affect how you feel even if the reach to the center of the bar is the same. So there, you can measure at a couple other spots. You can measure to the end of the hoods and transfer that fit. I remember the first time I got on a hydraulic brake bike, I'd measure it, it felt perfect. Get on the bike, it felt weird, I'd measure it again. No, the measurements were right. It's because the hoods going from a mechanical brake to a hydraulic brake were just a little bit longer. So there, you've got to keep in mind all the different variables that can affect the reach. Sometimes you can't get all the different things to fit, so you have to pick one. Whichever you pick, just keep that standard as you transfer the fit. Other things to watch out for. Crank length can affect your fit. Ideally, you want to keep that the same one bike to the next. Crank width can also slightly affect your fit. Shoes can affect the fit. The cleat position on the shoes can affect the fit. When transferring your bike fit one to the next, it's ideal, as with the saddle, to keep those variables as standardized as much as possible. How much does all of this matter? This is where the fourth tool comes in, your gut. Once you're on the bike, whether you are comfortable or not is the ultimate determinant of success. Sometimes I will get on a test bike and it feels strange for the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then once I'm warmed up, it's totally fine. That same thing goes for crank lengths being different, bar widths being different. Some of those things you can adapt to, and just going from something that you're used to something that's new is not necessarily a bad thing. However, if you are uncomfortable over the long haul, then that is a bad thing. If you are starting from a bike fit that you love, try to keep it as similar as possible. If you're unsure about what a good bike fit is, by all means, go to a bike shop, go to a bike fitter. And ideally, you've got a bike where you can adjust the cockpit so you can try different positions to see what works best for you. So, takeaways. Standardize, standardize, standardize. Standardize your measurements. Always start from the bottom bracket. Always measure to the same place on the saddle. Not just the height, but also the fore aft. When possible, if you're transferring a fit, take the same saddle with you. If not, use your body's position in relation to the bottom bracket to figure out the fore aft there. On the front end, standardize, standardize, standardize. Always measure to the same spot, but be aware that bar shape and even hood shape can affect your fit. And yes, integrated cockpits look great, but be aware of their limitations. That's very much a measure 3 times, cut once, or in this case, buy once. And lastly, bike fitters and bike shops are your friends when you have questions about what a good fit is and how to adjust a bicycle to fit comfortably for you. Hopefully this video has helped with some tips as to how to transfer your fit from one bike to the next, because when you're comfortable on your bike, that definitely helps you enjoy the ride. And yes, if you've been watching my videos before, you know my garage is a work in progress. I hope to have it done by the turn of the new year, but COVID had other problems. And you know, a good way to make God laugh is you state your plans. So So garage is not done, but it is a work in progress. Like me, like the bike fit, like the ride.